श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः। नमः सभाभ्यः सभापतिभ्यश्च वो नमः। वेदण्डास्यं गिरां देवीं सद्गुरोः पादपङ्कजं जगद्गुरूंश्च शृङ्गाद्रिस्थितान् वन्देऽर्थसिद्धये। मालासुधाकुम्भविबोधमुद्रा विद्याविराजत्करवारिजाताम् अपारकारुण्यसुधाम्बुराशिं श्रीशारदाम्बां प्रणतोऽस्मि नित्यम्। प्रमाणनखनिर्भिन्नमहामोहामरारये नमस्कुर्मो नृसिंहाय स्वप्रकाशचिदात्मने। गिरां देवी वाणी विमलगुणिनौ मे च पितरौ गुरूत्तंसाः मल्लाप्रगडकुलभूषा मणिबुधः कुटुम्बाख्यः शास्त्री रसिकहृदया ये सहृदयाः निजाशीर्भिः कुर्युः सफलवचसं मां करुणया। श्रीसच्चिदानन्दशिवाभिनव्यनृसिंहभारत्यभिधान्यतीन्द्रान् विद्यानिधीन् मन्त्रनिधीन् सदात्मनिष्ठान् भजे मानवशम्भुरूपान्। सदात्मध्याननिरतं विषयेभ्यः पराङ्मुखं नौमि शास्त्रेषु निष्णातं चन्द्रशेखरभारतीं विवेकिनं महाप्रज्ञं धैर्यौदार्यक्षमानिधिं सदाभिनवपूर्वं तं विद्यातीर्थगुरुं भजे। अज्ञानां जाह्नवीतीर्थं विद्यातीर्थं विवेकिनां सर्वेषां सुखदन्तीर्थं भारतीतीर्थमाश्रये। विद्याविनयसम्पन्नं वीतरागं विवेकिनं वन्दे वेदान्ततत्त्वज्ञं विधुशेखरभारतीम्। शारदा शारदाम्भोजवदना वदनाम्बुजे सर्वदा सर्वदास्माकं सन्निधिं क्रियात्। नमस्तस्मै वराहाय हेलयोद्धरते महीं खुरमध्यगतो यस्य मेरुः खुरखुरायते। तुङ्गे शुभदतरङ्गे मकरतुरङ्गे क्षणिर्जितकुरङ्गे शृङ्गेरी पुररङ्गे कचधुतभृङ्गे रमस्व हृद्रङ्गे. With namaskars to the feet of Ubhaya Jagadgurus and with namaskars to Sharadamba and namaskars to all of you. We are indeed very fortunate to be able to speak about the divine river Tungabhadra during the time of Tungabhadra Pushkaras, during this Punya Kala. So we'll take this as Acharya's grace that we are able to do this. Tungabhadra occupies a very prominent spot among all of the rivers that we have in India. Vidyaranya Swami writes in Madhava Acharya writes in the Shankara Digvijaya, when Adi Shankara Bhagavatpada went to Sringeri, he saw there Samsparsha Matrena Vitirna Bhadra Vidyotate Yatra Cha Tunga Bhadra. So one of the main features that attracted Adi Shankaracharya to Sringeri, aside from the ahimsa that he saw with the snake shielding the frog and the tapas of Vibhandaka Maharshi and Rishyashranga Maharshi, was the fact that the divine river Tungabhadra flowed here. And what kind of a river was this? He says, Samsprishti Matrena Vitirna Bhadra. So just by touching Tungabhadra, not even taking a bath in it, just by touching the waters of Tungabhadra, she gives all auspiciousness, Bhadra. So such is the river Tungabhadra. And they also say, Tungabhadra Mahapunya Nadinam Pravara Shubha. So Tungabhadra is Nadinam Pravara, one of the greatest of all the rivers in India. So as is the case, we see that all methods of worship that we do in Sanatana Dharma originate from the Vedas. So even this concept of worshipping rivers as devatas and not just treating them as places where water flows, we see in the Vedas. So we see Devitame, Ambitame, Naditame, Saraswati. So when we conceptualize Saraswati Devi, she is Ambitame, the greatest of mothers, Devitame, the greatest of devatas, and we also see her as Naditame, the greatest of all rivers. So we had the Saraswati Nadi that is currently in Antarvahini at Triveni Sangama, but such a way we see in the Vedas that we envision her. In the same way, we actually not only pray to rivers, but in Vedas we also see that we offer prayers to their tributaries as well. So we have Imam me Gange Yamune Saraswati Shutudresto Magam Sachata Parushniya Asikniya Marudridhe Vitastayarji Kiye Shrunuhya Sushomaya. So we see this mantra coming also in Veda. So here we not only pray to the main rivers of Ganga, Yamuna, Saraswati, Shutudri, but with Shutudri, Stomagam Sachata Parushniya. So Shutudri along with its tributary Parushni. And then Asikniya Marudvrudhe. So Namaskaram to the Marudvrudh river along with its tributary Asikni. And then Vitastayarji Kiye Shrunuhya Sushomaya. And also to the Vitastaya and also to the Arjikiya river with its two tributaries Vitasta and Sushoma. So we not only pray to rivers that are main channels, but we also envision and visualize the tributaries as well as devatas, and we see that Tungabhadra is just that. So Tungabhadra is born in the Sahyadris. So we see Vedagiri, we see used to her to describe her in Tungabhadra Mahatmya. So she arises from this one place called Vedagiri, and then she flows Srishaila Padagamini. She flows towards Srishaila, and then Tunga and Bhadra meet. So the Tunga river and the Bhadra river both meet at Sangamasthana, and then at Sangameshwara, both of these go and mix into the main river, Krishna, the Krishna Nadi. So that is the geographical aspect of Tunga. Now, how did Tungabhadra get its name? This is another aspect we need to see. Tunga means high, lofty. Bhadra, as we said earlier, means auspiciousness. So actually, Jagadguru themselves write in their Tungastava, they say, Majjale snapanakartra naranam Tungabhadra manisham karavani Suchanaya bhavati karunardre tadrisham kila dadhatyabhidhanam. So the promise that Tungabhadra has made to all of us is Mat jale snapanakartra naranam. So for those people who have bathed in my waters, for those people who have done snana in my waters, Anisham, always, at all times, Tungabhadram Anisham Karavani. I shall always give them very lofty auspiciousness, not just these small good fortunes, but massive amounts of good fortune. So to Suchanaya, so to remind us of that, Tadrisham Abhidhanam Kila Dadhati. So, O Tunga Devi, to remind us of that, you hold such a beautiful name, says Acharya. So that is one aspect of Tunga. And then we also see that Tungabhadra holds very specific importance, obviously, to Tungabhadra, to Sringeri Matha itself. So aside from the fact that it flows right next to the Matha, we see Shankaracharya mention this in his Mathamnaya Shasana. So he says, when he's talking about Sringeri, so Dakshinamnaya Sringeri cha Matho Bhavet. So he says in the south, there will be the Matha of Sringeri. And there, Rameshwarahvayam Kshetram Adivaraha Devata. So here, the Kshetra in the south is Rameshwara, and the Devata of Sringeri Matha is Adivaraha. As we all know, as we've definitely heard before in terms of Tunga, Tungabhadra was born from Varahaswami. How we'll see later, but the Kshetra Palaka or the Kshetra Devata, not the Kshetra Palaka, the Kshetra Devata of Sringeri is also Adivarahaswami. And then he also says Sureshwarakhya Acharya Tungabhadra tu Tirthakam. So the first Acharya here is, of course, the Vartikakara of Shankaracharya, of Shankaracharya's works, Sureshwaracharya, and the Tirtha here, so the divine river here that is purifying the place is Tungabhadra. So we see this not only in religious contexts and not only in these historical concepts or geographical concepts, but we also see Tungabhadra mentioned interestingly in Ayurveda as well, Ayurveda and Pakashastra too. So I was doing some research and I came across this text called Bhojana Kutuhala written by Sri Raghava. So in it, it is not just about Bhojana, but it talks about the grains that are good for us. It talks about the dhanyas that are good for us. And it even talks about what types of waters, honeys, milks, all the differences in these padarthas and how they affect the human body. So when talking about waters, he mentions the writer Sri Raghava mentions the qualities of each water. So he says Tungabhadra jalam swadu nirmalam. He says nirmalam swadudam guru, and not only that, Kandu pittasradam prayaha satmye shaityakaram param. So we've heard the phrase before it, Ganga Tungapanam Ganga Snanam. So it's best to do Snanam in Ganga. And it is very good to drink the water of Tungabhadra. Why? Because we see in the shloka from the Ayurveda, from an Ayurvedic text, that Tungabhadra's water has medicinal properties. So nirmalam, it is pleasant. Swadudam, it is very sweet. And not only that, Kandu pittasradam. So asra, it increases, it is good for the blood in the body. Pitta, it is good for the pitta in the body. So Kandu pittasradam and satmi, so when ingested, it is Shaityakaram. So we see, right, we were told to drink buttermilk when it is very hot. We are told to drink a lot of water. So especially Tungabhadra, it helps in that Shaityakara when it is ingested. So we see even when we go to Sringeri, right, when we, as you go past the Vidyashankara temple and you go down the steps to go to Tunga, we not only sprinkle the water on our head, but you'll see people taking it and drinking it as tirtham as well. Usually we don't do that with rivers, but with Tunga it is specified because Tunga is not just a divine river from the Adhyatmika standpoint, but we see even in Ayurveda we have talked about the medicinal properties of Tungabhadra's water. So Tungabhadra is such a divine river, and in the Puranas we see its origin. So it comes from the Yajnavaraha avatara that Bhagavan Vishnu took. So I thought I would also talk a little bit shortly about the Yajnavaraha aspect, because if we understand the nature of Yajnavaraha, we can understand why Tungabhadra is so great. So when Varahaswamy took an avatara, he took the form of a boar, of a wild boar, a white boar, to uplift the earth from the ocean where it was hidden by Hiranyaksha. And when he did that, the Devatas with their Divya Drishti, and especially the Rishis in the Tritiya Skandha of Bhagavata, we see that they saw what Bhagavan's true form actually was. So on the top, it looked like he was a boar with the tusks, the bristles, the four legs, the snout, and all of that. But the Rishis, to their Mantra Drishti, to their Divya Drishti, they saw the true nature of the limbs of Yajnavarahaswamy, and they saw that each part of his body was actually a different part of a yajna. So that is why he is called not just Adivaraha, but Yajnavaraha. So they say Sruktunda Asit, Sruva Ishana Sayo. So they see that the Sruk is his snout, and then the Sruva, the Sruva are his nostrils. And then they say Chandamsi Lomani. So the Vedas are the bristles of the hairs. And then his tongue is the Agni. So in this way, all the rishis, they see that Yajnavaraha is nothing but the summation of Yajna Swarupa itself. So Adivaraha and Narasimha put together form Karma and Brahma respectively. So we see, right, in all of Veda there are two things told. So Karma Brahma Swarupine, Kanda Dvayopapadhyaya Karma Brahma Swarupine, Svargapavargadaya Yajneshaya Namo Namaha. So that Yajnesha, that is Yajnavaraha, is the Karma Swarupa, the Karma Marga Swarupa. So we see that Yajnavaraha is each limb is a yajna. So is a part of a yajna. So we see that the rishis, they're doing a stotram. Namo namaste khila mantra devata dravyaya sarva kratave kriyatmane vairagya bhaktyatma jayanubhavita jnanaya vidya gurave namo namaha. Sridharacharya writes a beautiful bhashya for this shloka in Bhagavata. So Varahaswamy, they're saying Namo namaste. So namaskaram to you, who is Akhila mantra devata dravyaya. So you are the sum total of all mantras used in yajnas, the sum total of all devatas that are propitiated, that are prayed to via yajna, that are satisfied via yajna, and also dravyaya. You are also the sum total of all dravyas that are used in yajna. Sarva Kratave, you are the embodiment of all yajnas, not just the yajnas, kriyatmane, all actions that happen in the world. So they say for Kriya, Sridharacharya specifically writes, Samanya Rupa Karmanyapi. So even not just the Vaidika yajna karmas, but any action that happens in this world is in itself a small yajna. So you are that aspect of yajna that is present in every motion in this entire universe. And what do you do by giving us, by being this karma marga? Because especially for us as adherents of as bhaktas of Sringeri, we hold that tyagene ke amritatva manushu jnana devatu kaivalyam. So we need jnana to get moksha. So yajnesha, yajnavaraha, how do you help us to get there? By this karma, by this method of karma yoga, what do you give us? Vairagya. This one phrase, this one samasa, Vairagya Bhaktyatma Jayanubhavita Jnanaya. This phrase is the summation of what Yajnavaraha does for us, is what his grace does for us. So what this karma does is it increases Vairagya towards us. So as we do these karmas with the Vaidika aspect, with the karma yoga mindset, so basically doing everything as Ishwararpana and receiving everything as Ishwara Prasada, we get Vairagya. With Vairagya, what happens? Vairagya Bhakti. So then we get Vairagya towards Laukika Vishayas, towards the world, and Bhakti towards Ishvara. Vairagya Bhakti, and then what happens with Bhakti towards Ishvara? Atmajaya. Atmasthiryam, Chitta Sthiryam is what Sridhara Acharya says here. So by that we get Chitta Shuddhi and the ability to fix our mind on one thing wholeheartedly. So Atma Vairagya Bhakti Atmajaya Anubhavita. So such a person, Anubhavita Jnanaya. So the person who has conquered their mind in such a way, the jnana that they experience is you, O Yajnavaraha. So what do we see? The karma that leads to the vairagya, that leads to the bhakti, that leads to the Atmajaya is Varahaswami. And the jnana that this Atmajaya leads to is also Varahaswami. So we see that Yajnavaraha's grace is necessary in us both being able to fulfill our Vaidika karmas, our Vihita karmas properly, as well as use these Vihita karmas to as a stepping stone to the end goal of Jnana. So then what happened? Nikshipya bhumim jaladhau yathavat. So that such a Yajna Swarupa Varahaswami, Nikshipya bhumim jaladhau yathavat. So having restored the earth to its proper place, Shramanvito Vedagirim Jagama. So naturally, as anyone is after doing any massive task, Shramanvita, he was a bit tired and he Vedagirim Jagama. He went to Vedagiri. So that is a specific mountain in the Sahyadris. Geographically, there is also this one Parvatam called Varahadri, no doubt probably got its name because of this Aitihya. So he went to that mountain to rest. And what happened there? Tasyangajas Svedajalam Prabhutam Damshtrasritam Punyanadi Babhuva. So his body sweat, the sweat of his body flowed through his tusks. So the two Damshtras, the two tusks that he used to lift the earth, and having flowed from there, it became a Punya Nadi. So Varaha Vama Damshtratu Tunga Tunga Phalaprada Samudbhota Dakshina Damshtrat Samudbhota Bhadra Dakshinattu. Dakshina Damshtrataha Bhadra came. So from the Vama Damshtra, Tunga came. From the Dakshina Damshtra, Bhadra came. So what does this mean though? We need to look at the meaning of this. So if we say that Bhagavan, Yajnavaraha is the sum total of all yajnas. So if his body is yajna, the sweat of his body is yajna phala. So it is the yajna phala that comes from the yajna body of Adivaraha that flowed through his tusks. What are the tusks? The tusks are the implement that he used to uplift Bhumi. So what the Varaha story tells us is anytime that there is trouble in Bhumi, anytime that there is trouble in earth, what is the method to overcome that? If you do yajna, the yajna uplifts the earth. So the Damshtras are the specific capability of Bhagavan to lift the earth. That is why Sudarshana is present as Bhagavan's Shakti in every avatara. In Narasimha Avatara, he was in the nails. In Parashurama Avatara, he was in the axe. In Varaha Avatara, Sudarshana was in the tusks of Varahaswami. So when we say that Varahaswami lifted the earth through his tusks, what we mean is that the power of Yajna, Bhagavan as Yajna Swarupa can uplift the earth in times of trouble. So when we say that Bhagavan's sweat, this Yajna Phala flowed through his tusks, and we are able to bathe in that water, what that basically means is Tunga is the fruit of Yajna, Yajna Phala, which is why it is so divine and auspicious to do bath in him, in Tunga's waters. And actually we even see in Bhagavata, Bhagavan's sweat is described when Bhagavan shakes his tail. So Bhagavan has just come out of the ocean and he shakes his tail. And the rishis say, Bhagavan, the water coming from your tail is equal to an avabhrita snana. So after yajna is over, you are supposed to do an avabhrita snana that seals the fruit of the yajna. So the yajna, the apurva that is born of the yajna becomes complete with the avabhrita snana. So the water that comes from Bhagavan's tail itself is avabhrita snana. So then what more to think of the river that came from his tusks, right? So we even say Jahnavi is born from Haripada. So Ganga, which is acclaimed as the greatest of all nadis, is born from Bhagavan's feet. Then Papaheti Kimadbhutam, so Varahi Sarvangaja, Sarvangodbhuta. So then what more to say of Tunga, which is born from the entire body of Varahaswami? What is it? It is no surprise. Papaheti na Kimadbhutam. So it is not a surprise that Tungabhadra destroys sins, because Ganga itself being born from the feet of Bhagavan is destroying sins. Tungabhadra being born from the entire body of Bhagavan destroying sins is no surprise. So one thing that Tunga embodies to us is this concept of yajna and yajna phala. Another very important thing that Tungabhadra shows us is Tunga Narayana Sakshat Bhadra Devo Maheshwaraha Tayor Bhedah Tayor Yah Kurute Bhedakari Patat Vrajat Yadha, they say. So Tunga is Vishnu, Narayana Sakshat, and Bhadra is Maheshwara, is Shiva. So Tunga and Bhadra are not separate nadis. This is one thing that we have to understand very clearly, because a lot of people might get the question, if it is Tunga Bhadra's Pushkaras, right? So the way we delegate Pushkaras is, when there are 12 Rashis, when Brahaspati enters each Rashi, there is a different river that we pray to in that Pushkara. So like they say, Meshecha Ganga, Vrishabhecha Narmada. So when the Brahaspati enters Mesha Rashi, we pray to Ganga. When it enters Vrishabha Rashi, when the Guru Graha enters Vrishabha Rashi, we pray to Narmada. In the same way, Chapecha Sindhu. So when it enters the Dhanu Rashi, we pray to Sindhu River. And then Makarecha Narmada. When it enters Makara Rashi, we pray Makarecha Tunga. We pray Makarecha Bhadra. We pray to Bhadra River. So it says Bhadra here. So why are we doing Tunga Bhadra Pushkaras and praying to Tunga if it says Bhadra? Because Tunga Bhadra and Tunga Bhadra are non-different. It is the same water, the same Yajna Phala of Bhagavan that flows through them. Tunga is Vishnu, Bhadra is Maheshwara. To see Bhedam between them is seeing Bhedam between Hari and Hara, which is a sin in Shastra, quite frankly. It is a papa to conceive that Vishnu and Shiva are two different things. Shivasya Hridayam Vishnu, Vishnuascha Hridayagam Shivaha, Shivaya Vishnu Rupaya, Shiva Rupaya Vishnave. And even if we link this with the Yajna concept from before, both Vishnu has been described as Yajna in Shastra and Shiva has been described as Yajna in Shastra. For Vishnu, at least, we have the very famous saying in Veda, Yajna by Vishnu. So Yajna is nothing but Vishnu himself. Shiva, we see Shiva has this concept of Ashtamurti. So Shiva is present in the Panchabhutas, Surya Chandra, and the Yajamani. So Kalidasa, when talking about this, says, Vahati Vidhihutam Ya Havihi Ya Cha Hotri. So the two Murtis of Shiva are Ya Vidhihutam Havihi Vahati. So that Yajna Agni that bears the Havi that is put into it via the Yajna process, as well as the Hotri, not just the Yajnagni, but the Yajamana. So the Yajna Karta also is Shiva's Murti. So Shiva too is Yajna Swarupa. To see Bheda between Tunga and Bhadra is to see Bheda between Hari and Hara, which is why where Tunga and Bhadra meet, and where Tunga and Bhadra both go and meet with Krishna, in both places there are Shiva Kshetras as well as Vishnu Kshetras. So it is important for us to remember via this Tungabhadra Pushkara, this worship of Tungabhadra, that both Hari and Hara are one, that their tattva is the same, that both are Ishvara, that both are different forms of Brahman. So in this way, Tungabhadra's Mahatmya is described in such a great way in Shastra. Also, Tungabhadra is described as Vishnu Patni. So just as by uplifting Bhumi, Varaha became Bhupati. He became the husband of Bhumi. In the same way, we also envision Tungabhadra as the spouse of Bhagavan Varaha. So Parjanyasya yatha vidyut Vishnor mayat tvamevahi. So you see this in Brahmanda Purana and Tungabhadra Mahatmya. So just as the vidyut, the lightning accompanies the megha, just as the vidyut is an inherent part of the megha, in the same way you are the Maya of Vishnu that is inherent in his capacity as Ishvara, as Maya Vishishta Ishvara. So that is why also when we look at Tungabhadra's Devata Swarupa, we see Padmastham Shankha Chakrabja Swarna Kumbha Karambujam Isha Shrishatmikam Vande Tungabhadram Aghapaham. So if you look at Tungabhadra's Swarupa, she is Padmastham, she is sitting in a Padma, and Shankha Chakra Abja Swarna Kumbha Karambujam. In her four hands, she holds Shankha, Chakra, Ambuja, a lotus, and Suvarna Kumbha, a golden pot. So, and then Isha Shrishatmikam, she is both comprised of Ishvara, Isha, and Shrisha, the Lord of Lakshmi, Vishnu. And she is Tungabhadra Aghapaham. Tungabhadram Aghapaham. She removes all sins. If we look at what she is holding in her hands here, she is holding Shankha Chakra and Padma. These are the same things that Bhagavan Vishnu holds. Shankha Chakra, Gada, Padma are exactly what Adivaraha Swami holds in his own hands. So, because she is the Shakti of Vishnu, she holds the same ayudhas that he does in her hands. So when we see Tungabhadra, there are all these aspects of Sanatana Dharma that we need to keep in mind. The fact that she is the Yajna Phala of Adivaraha Swami, that comes from the body of Yajna Varaha. The fact that she is the live example of how Bhagavan Shiva and Bhagavan Vishnu are the same. The fact that she is Vishnu's Maya Shakti herself. So all of these, keeping in mind, our rishis have given us this wonderful method of Pushkara to worship these divine rivers that flow through our nation, that flow through our Bharata Varsha. So Tungabhadra, especially being a divine river of those, water itself has been described as so divine in our Shastras and Vedas. That is why another word for water is Amrita. Interestingly enough, another word for water is Visha as well. Jagadguru makes a pun on this in his Tungastava. He says, Tvadiyam Tungembha Bahu Madhurimadhyam Hyamritavat ततः सर्वं जात्या जलममृतशब्द प्रगदितं त्वदन्यासाम् अम्भः प्रकटसरितां यद्विषनिभं ततः सर्वं जात्या vishamiti cha shabdena gaditam. So he makes a very beautiful pun on the fact that in the paryaya padas for water, for jalam, there are two words, there's amritam and visham. So apastri bhumni varvari sarilam kamalam jalam payah kilalam amritam jeevanam bhuvanam vanam kabandham udakam pathaf pushkaram sarvatomukam ambhorna stoya paniya neerakshiram bushambaram megha pushpam dhana. Anyway, in this whole list of words for water, visha is one of the words for water. So we see that both amrita, which also means nectar, is a paryaya pada for water, and visha, which means poison, is also a paryaya pada for water. So Acharya says why. So he says, Devi Tunga, because your water is like amrita. So we saw in the Ayurveda too, right? It said swadudam. The water is very sweet. So bahu madhurimadhyam hyamritavat. So O Tunga Devi, your water is as sweet as amrita. Therefore, ataha sarvam jatya, because all of the other waters belong to the jati, belong to the category. In IT language, this is class, I guess you could say, because everything else belongs to that. All other water by association is also called amrita. So because your water is like amrita, all water, because it too is water, became called amrita. On the flip side, the water of rivers that are not yours, in comparison to your waters, they're vishanibham. They are like visha. So not that the rivers, the water of Ganga or Yamuna is like Visha, but in comparison to the sweetness of Tunga's river, Ganga and Yamuna, their waters seem very bitter like poison. So because all other rivers aside from you, their water is like poison, by association with those waters, all water got the name Visha, he says. So in this way, water holds this very specific position among us. Water, another word for water is called Jivana, life itself. So even Sannidhanam, Shri Sannidhanam Varu said in his Anugraha Bhashana, we can live for a decent amount of time without food, but without water, it is not possible for us to survive for a long time. And not just that, in Shastra, water is the only thing that has the ability, is what we use to carry mantras, and not just mantras, to carry the jiva. So when we do tarpana, or when we see people giving shapas or varas, we do jalamantrana. So when we give arghya too, we do mantrana of water with the Gayatri mantra, because water has this capacity to hold life, to hold chaitanya. So when we hold the water in our hands, then we tell Gayatri mantra and then we give arghya. In the same way, when we do prokshana before we eat, we hold the water in our hands, tell Gayatri mantra, and then purify the food before we offer it as yajna prasada inside via the panchahutis. And not only that, in Shastra also says that when the jiva is looking to enter, the jivatma, it enters water. So it looks for the water that the father drinks. The jivatma enters the water, not the anna. The jivatma enters the water because water has this capacity to hold life. So the jivatma enters the water. From the water, he enters the pitragarbha, he enters the father, stays in the father for 3 months, and then by the father goes to the mother for 9 months, and thus the jiva is then born with a body. So water has this divine aspect of being able to give us life, being conducive to Chaitanya. And our rishis set up this Pushkara system in order that we recognize that and pray to these devatas, because this water is not just jada. And another responsibility that falls to us along with these Pushkaras is the responsibility of looking after our rivers. So it is it is very important that we do bhavana of our rivers as devatas, that we do bhavana of our rivers as these yajna prasadas and as Hari and Hara and all of this. But it also falls on us to keep the rivers clean. I remember Mahasanidhanam Varu when he did a Vijaya Yatra in 2012-13. When he came to Dharmapuri, he was speaking about Nrisimha Swami there, and then he was also speaking about the river there, and he expressed his great grief that the river there was being polluted by factory pollutants. So it is our acharyas remind us time and time again that devotion to rivers means worshipping them with mantras and pujas, but also keeping an environmental aspect and keeping them clean. Um, in our Shastras, in Veda too, actually, they say, they say, Amritam va apaha amritasyanantaritye napsu mutrapurisham kuryat na nishtivet na vivasanasnayat. These are all Vedic commands. These are all Vaidika vidhis that Veda has given us. So, Amritam va apaha. Apas, the waters are nothing but Amritam. So, Amritasyanantaritye. So, to preserve the sanctity of that water, what do we need to do? Or what are the things that Veda has given us as vidhi is napsu mutra purisham kuryat. We are not supposed to dump human waste, whether liquid or solid, into these rivers. What are we doing? All the sewage systems are going and dumping straight into the rivers. But Veda says napsu mutra purisham kuryat. And ishtivet, you're not even supposed to spit in rivers. Na vivasanasnayat, you're not supposed to bathe ungarmented in water, because the water is not supposed to touch the unholy places on the body like payu and upastha. So Veda tells us to take care of the rivers in such a way. We are told not to spit in them. We are told not to dump waste in them. We are told, even because there might be certain malinya, certain impurities associated with the body, not to bathe without clothes in rivers. So it falls to us to take such good care of our rivers, especially Tungabhadra, because Sarvadevamayi Tunga, we say in says Purana. The water is Vishnu, the stones in the river are Shiva himself, the sand on the side are rishis, the mud in the bottom of the river is Surya, the kusha grass growing on the banks is Brahma, the darbhas growing are all devatas. So Tungabhadra is such a divine river. It is a devata. Remember, we do namaskaram to Tunga because we are not just praying to the waters, the jada waters of the river. We are praying to the devata, that is the adhishthatri of these waters. So as we do these Tungabhadra Pushkaras, as we pray to Tunga Devi, to Bhadra Devi, to Tungabhadra Devi, these are the things we need to keep in mind. So we need to keep in mind the philosophical giving, the philosophical messages that it gives us of the Yajna Prasada, of Harihara Advaita, of Vishnu Maya. We need to keep in mind the Devata aspect, that she is the Maya of Vishnu, that Tunga is a Devata that can give us all Shubhas, all Mangalas when prayed to. And also we need to keep in mind the Bhautika aspect, the environmental consciousness that we have to have, that Tungabhadra and waters, the rivers of Bharatavarsha, need to be preserved. And this can only be possible via Devi Sharadamba's grace, via Bhagavan Yajnavaraha's grace, by our Jagat Guru's grace. So let us pray to them that even though we are far away, even if we think of Tungabhadra and do snanam in our homes, at least we can get the Tunga Snana Phala. And Acharya Sanidhanam Varu himself has said that. So if we, though in this present time of COVID, we may not be able to travel to Tunga, to Sringeri, to Tunga and do snanam there, regardless of how well we remember it, that I can see that ghat in front of my eyes right now. It's such a beautiful place, right underneath the feet of the Subramanya temple. There's the linga there. We have that vigraha of the snake shading the frog. So that's such a beautiful ghat we have in Sringeri. So though we all want to be there doing snana in Tunga, doing Tunga Pana, because it is not possible in current global situation, Sannidhanam Varu has said that it is enough, it is good for us in this present times to think of Tunga Snanam, do Namaskaram to Tunga, and then do Snana. It will be equivalent to doing Tunga Snana. So Bhavagrahi Janardhana, Bhagavan Janardhana, Bhagavan takes our bhava when we can't do anything else. So let us worship Tunga in this Pavitra Kala of Pushkaras. Let us pray to our acharyas, their grace flows like Tunga upon us. And let us also do Namaskaram to Sharadamba, who has chosen to be next to Tunga as her place of worship. So let us do namaskaram to all of them. स्वस्ति प्रजाभ्यः परिपालयन्तां न्याय्येन मार्गेण महीं महिषाः गोब्राह्मणेभ्यः शुभमस्तु नित्यं लोकाः समस्ताः सुखिनो भवन्तु इत्येषा वाङ्मयी पूजा श्रीमच्छङ्करपादयोः अर्पिता तेन देवेशः प्रीयतां मे सदाशिवः. स्वस्ति.